Welcome to the Hub's YouTube channel. I'm Harrison Lohman, managing editor of the Hub. Today I'm joined by a very special individual, Rick Bell. He is a columnist at Postmedia, and he is joining us from Alberta. Rick, how's it going?
Well, spring's in the air. That's the good news. The bad news, we have another Liberal government.
32 of Alberta's 37 ridings, though, won by Conservatives. 2 Liberals, 1 NDP win. What are Albertans making of the election results so far, Rick?
Not good. I mean, I think the expectation, the hope was until, as you know, a few months ago, the hope was that there would be change and big change, a change in government and a whole change in focus as far as the issues that trouble a lot of Albertans. And of course, that did not happen. So
even though our Prime Minister
expectations were so high, and now they are not there at all. Even though I want to point out, in a lot of these ridings in Alberta, the Conservative candidate got 70 and 80% of the vote. Like, we're talking landslides.
But Rick, Mark Carney's an Edmonton boy. That doesn't land with people in your community?
Yeah, 41 years ago. Come on. How often could you dine out on that? You know, I had a cup of coffee in Paris once, but I don't call myself a Parisian, you know.
Okay.
Like that's 41 years ago. He's like 60 years old. He left forever ago. He's not representing an Edmonton riding. He doesn't hang out in Edmonton. I don't see him at the local pub watching the Oilers games, despite his love of the Edmonton Oilers.
Okay.
He's an Ontario guy.
Rick, I want to get...
And an Oxford University guy and an international guy. He's not an Alberta guy.
You Albertans keep interrupting us Ontarians. I'm going to put my foot down. Let's talk about Premier Smith. This is someone... I'm going to praise you here. You're probably the most well-connected journalist when it comes to sources within Smith's government. She comes out yesterday and says, as Premier, I will not permit the status quo to continue. Albertans are proud... Albertans are proud Canadians that want this nation to be strong, prosperous, and united, but we will no longer tolerate having our industries threatened and our resources landlocked by Ottawa. What did you make of her statement, and what sort of insight can you provide in terms of what her next steps are over the next couple days?
Well, first off, it's not a bold statement for people in Alberta, and particularly people in her own party's base. They would have expected nothing less than what she stated. Why? Because for the last 10 years, including the recent history, she has tried to deal with the federal Liberals and has been largely unsuccessful. And if I hear one more time about Trans Mountain Pipeline, I'm going to cry right here on the Hub. Because when you look at the amount of money, the amount of wealth created in Alberta that Canada shares in, it is way more than one pipeline expansion, and there's more than one pipeline that is needed. So rebuffed. This was the minimum she could have said when so many people in Alberta are beyond disappointed. They're angry. There is going to be a meeting on Friday. On Friday, there's a meeting of her party's members of the legislature to discuss where Alberta goes from here, what should be the Alberta response. I hear she's probably going to come have another media availability tomorrow. That is to say, Thursday. I also hear there's going to be something coming next week. So this is just the beginning. And just in preparation for this, I asked somebody in the government, what can I tell the loyal Hub people? Buckle up, baby. Buckle up.
This was the phrase they used, buckle up?
Buckle up.
Oh, my gosh. They've also used the phrase, Smith has talked about an unprecedented national unity crisis that could be coming our way.
Absolutely.
She talks about
there is an unprecedented.
Hostile acts from Ottawa. Okay, if you're Prime Minister Carney, what should he expect in terms of the tones of these meetings he's going to have with Premier Smith?
Is he going to have one? Has he phoned her yet?
I'm not sure.
Should.
You know better than me.
I think if this was Quebec and there was these kinds of machinations going on already, you would think he would have phoned her. I'm going to ask her tomorrow. So, the last meeting was very unsuccessful. He met with Smith. She mentioned some of the standard demands. This isn't some mystery. what Alberta wants. Why is Alberta always complaining? They're such whiners. It's really easy. There are certain laws that are disadvantageous to our major industry, oil and gas. Fix it, Carney. It's not some sort of hand wringing and weeping. It's really simple. Just do it. Carney says he wants to build Canada. Build, baby, build, he said on election night. He also said he wants to unite Canadians for a common cause. So it's easy. But during the election, at a rally in Calgary, I asked him for commitment on pipelines and LNG projects, and he fiddled and faddled and stick-handled and didn't really give a definitive answer. Albertans want a definitive answer. Albertans want to know that we won't be treated now as we were treated in the last 10 years, which is horrible. Maybe people in Ontario can't figure that out. Maybe they don't read news from the great outback of Canada. But that happened over and over again. Promises were made, promises were not kept.
Rick?
Trudeau said there was an opening. There never was. Jonathan Wilkinson said there was an opening. Champagne, LeBlanc, always disappointed. And there's a history of this sort of grievance in Alberta. So people now want an absolute, definitive, clear, no stick handling, no clever semantics answer. That's what Smith wants. And that's what most Albertans want. And that's what we haven't received.
Rick, you talk about grievance.
Has to do. It's easy.
Rick, you talk about grievance. I want to quote someone who's talking about grievance as well and who really disagrees with you. You and I passed around this column from Toronto Star business columnist David Olive. He writes, headline, "Perhaps it's time Alberta does go it alone," and says goodbye to Canada. He talks about your incurable sense of grievance with the rest of the Federation. What's your response to Mr. Olive?
If Ontario, his beloved Ontario, was treated the same way Alberta has been treated historically and in the recent past, he would not write that column about Ontario. He would not go to his newspaper in Toronto and say, these whiners about the auto industry, why are they always crying about the auto industry? Why do we have to unite and fight Trump for the auto industry? We don't have an auto industry in Alberta. Well, could you imagine? No, you couldn't imagine. Because those issues are very big, and they are truly big. But I think there is a lot, I know a lot of people out there hate Smith, hate the United Conservatives, perhaps even hate Poilievre. But the reality is, this is the biggest export to the United States. It's the biggest ticket item in Canada. So suck it up, Buttercup. Suck it up, Toronto columnist, because be careful what you wish for.
But because it's such an asset.
Just a bunch of hillbillies in the backcountry who are talking about things that may or may not happen.
Rick, because it's such an asset to the U.S., a lot of people here in Ontario said that's the very reason it should be used as a bargaining chip against the United States, that you pull that lever and we have actual leverage when it comes to negotiating with Trump. What do you say to that?
A line that Smith uses is she talks about Team Alberta and Team Canada. Maybe we're on Team Canada, but we'd sure like Team Canada to be Team Alberta. I think that would be perhaps a somewhat easier sell if the rest of Canada had defended Alberta when Alberta needed a defense.
Albertans have been angry for decades with Quebecers. This is a province that has received special treatment from the federal government. Albertans not being happy with that. What's Alberta's response to the idea that they could become the thing they hate?
Meaning?
Well, Ontarians would say, you want favorable treatment, an unfair advantage given to you by the federal government.
I thought people in Ontario, the center of the universe, the cultural center perhaps of Western civilization, if you talk to them, would understand that Alberta is the big daddy. Alberta is the big money contributor to this thing we call Confederation. Don't talk about special treatment. Albertan, you're sharing in the black gold. And that's why it perplexes people in Alberta that you don't want more black gold produced, which is what Alberta wants. Alberta wants more black gold produced, more oil and gas produced, more money coming into the coffers, yes, into the Alberta economy, but also the Canadian economy. So this is a great puzzle. But this idea of equating us with Quebec, who always has their hands out, this is the exact opposite. Alberta wants the likes of those people making those comments to leave us alone. Mr. Toronto columnist, just leave us alone and let us make money for you. What is the problem? We're not asking Ontario for something. We're asking for Ontario to get, or the federal government to get their hands off and allow these projects to proceed and allow wealth to be created for the entire country. But no, instead they want to talk about putting a tax on Alberta oil. Why don't they unleash? That's a word Prime Minister Carney uses all the time, unleash. Why don't they unleash the resources of Alberta, which will be a benefit to everybody across Canada?
One final question, Rick, before I move to this separation issue, which is something top of mind for a lot of folks, given the blue they saw appear on the map of Canada out west and the red they saw appear out east.
Right.
For Albertans, what does the lifespan of the oil industry look like? What you hear from Ontarians is it's finite, that we have to prepare for what is that lifespan ending in, not so many years. How do Albertans sort of conceptualize that lifespan?
It's not going to be in the next few years. That's the lifespan. And I think people should look at people who have studied this issue. So I don't get where they're, what do they think? There's not going to be oil in 10 years, 5 years, 15 years?
I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, again, this is another one of the, I really expected more out of the people. I have a great high regard for these deep thinkers in Ontario. I just can't believe they're not doing a lot of deep thinking now. I mean,
Well, here's the thinking.
Oil and gas is not going away. Not anytime soon.
Yeah.
Not anytime soon.
Let's talk about separation, something that your neighbors are or at least some of your neighbors are thinking of. Rick, how fringe is this or not fringe is this, okay? Because, there's different numbers being thrown around. A March Main Street poll found 37% of Albertans now support separation. I don't know what to make of that. A lot of people, other people telling me it's far smaller than that. I guess also keeping in mind the fact that the election results may have shifted the numbers. How fringe or not fringe is this group? How big of a group are we talking about here in Alberta?
Well, it depends what you mean by a group. If you're talking about what are the number of people that treat the issue seriously, that they'd be willing to sit down in a bar or a coffee shop or a meeting hall and discuss the possibility of it, that group is not a fringe group. Absolutely not a fringe group.
But people are going to act on those. People are going to act on that emotion. It's not just an idea. It's something that they actively want to pursue.
Well, let's put it this way. Premier Smith is going to be changing the law to make it easier to put a referendum question on a ballot.
So why would she do that? Much easier. Why is she doing that?
Because there are enough Albertans that I think want to weigh on the issue, and that is probably proof of the fact that it isn't just, four folks in the back of a room dreaming up conspiracies. I don't think it's that at all. Do I think it's 50% of Albertans? No, but remember this. There has been no campaign for separation. There is no leader of a separatist movement or an independence movement. There is no independence movement per se, not really. It's not like the Parti Québécois in Quebec, well established, or the Bloc Québécois. We have none of that. So when pollsters ask, what do you think? They're talking when we don't have, there's no infrastructure for this, and yet people are still talking about it at least. And this is why Carney does. If you want good news for Federalists in Canada, the good news is Carney really does have an opportunity here to
press the reset button.
At least attempt to change the conversation, which was poisoned for many years.
So
he does have, it's not like this is some sort of fait accompli or anything. The legislation for a referendum is just being introduced, was just introduced yesterday. So that'll take a while. But I could tell you, I'll tell you this, there will be enough signatures to have a referendum.
There will be enough signatures to have a referendum. Because I'm wondering,
supposedly you need about just under 200,000 signatures. I think they would get that.
We had a correspondent ask Danielle Smith a couple weeks ago if she thinks a Carney win would threaten national unity. She said, we're going to have to see what the reaction of Albertans is. You're saying that those numbers potentially could increase in the next few days. It's fringe, but there's no vessel for this emotion. But they're going to put something on the table as it relates to signatures of folks who would be interested in a referendum.
What's that? Sorry?
They're going to put signatures on the table in terms of getting a sense of how many people would be interested in a referendum.
Right. I mean, do not be surprised if there are enough signatures obtained, given the fact that they've changed the law from what was essentially an absolutely impossible number to at least a possible number. And yesterday, Premier Smith said she is a big advocate of citizen-initiated votes. Not just on this issue. She is an advocate. She spoke about California yesterday and said that they have many ballot questions. So she is in favor of more ballot questions, not fewer ballot questions. So therefore, they make it easier for Albertans to put things on the ballot to have more ballot questions. So I think she would be happy if there was 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 ballot questions, not all about this issue, but perhaps about other issues that are seen as worthy of a vote by Albertans. But again, I point out, Carney, the ball's in his court. I mean, we'll see what he does.
Just briefly, Rick, what happens? So the signatures are gathered in terms of how many people want a referendum to take place. Then what happens? Like, what's the next step that would then happen? Should they reach the threshold?
This only just rolled out, so I don't think we're getting way ahead. You're getting the real scoop here. We're way ahead of that. I don't know the exact mechanics. Let's wait until the bill actually passes, is debated in the legislature and passes, and then we'll have more details about that. But there would be, there wouldn't be an instant vote, but there would be a vote. I think it really depends on when people want to actually get those signatures as well, because that's a subject for debate. Do we rush to a referendum, which would, I think, almost certainly lose? I don't think it would get 50%.
Yes, can we make that clear?
I don't think Alberta's leaving Canada yet.
But
or do they wait and build up the infrastructure and have more of a, coherent movement and actual structure and all that goes along with that, to try to have that in place first before going to the vote? Because right now, again, we haven't seen the studies on whether it's viable.
Because this is what I want to understand, Rick.
I think the big story right now is that people are at least talking about it as an idea.
Yeah, but there aren't major MLAs behind this. There's not a lot. I'm wondering if there's a lot of money, like movers and shakers in the business community. This is still fringe when it comes to that, right? This is not being adopted in major ways by big players on the Alberta scene, is it?
Well, not people. There are organizations that are evolving, that are developing, but no, the oil patch CEOs are not having of the big companies are not having a news conference in the next day or two saying, let's get out of Canada. I think we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves there. I think the bigger story right now is that something that people, they talked a little bit after the last election when there was disappointment. And then they had what was called a fair deal panel, which discussed taking more power for Alberta. But now it's more serious. I mean, Preston Manning is now talking about having an assembly of people, which would consider, among other options, independence options. I think that was revealed yesterday. So the very fact that it has become, let's put it this way, the big news right now is that it is a serious discussion.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't just a few people blowing off steam. Does that mean it's all set up and there's MLAs on? But no, of course not. That's way premature. The election was only a few short, regrettable hours ago. But I think for people in the rest of the country to just think this is hot air, it would be a mistake. And I think that's because Albertans and a lot of people in Saskatchewan, and I even get interior BC people, were really, really, really disappointed, angry that the people who basically shafted us for 10 years are back in power. New leader or old leaders. The same players are there. And that's why, again, I reiterate, it's up to Carney to come out. If this was Quebec, this was Ontario. Well, it wouldn't be Ontario because Ontario runs the country. But if it was some other province, I think most Albertans would say there would be a strong effort to address this issue sooner rather than later. I believe in Carney's speech on election night, he mentioned the West in one sentence. He said, well, it's pretty tough out there. And then he spent quite a bit of time speaking about Quebec and how he wanted to preserve their identity and their culture and their language, etc. Fair enough. No problem with that. But I think he has to come out sooner rather than later, and he has to come out more definitively, and he has to treat it seriously. I mean, he has 2 MPs here, both who narrowly got in. He has the rest of the province, the suburbs of Edmonton, the suburbs of Calgary. Don't even talk to me about the rural areas where you could walk many kilometers.
They've already got their F Carney flags out.
Rick? Well, it's just, yeah, I mean, but I think people have to realize, I think when you're in may I use a very favorite left-wing word here, privileged. Ontario's in a very privileged position. It is the center of Canada. It is where they determine, or in large part, the elections. And we are, despite the opportunities here and the wealth created for the country here, we are seen as a million miles away. You know, when people come here, they treat us like, you know, something from a National Geographic commentary. Look at those weird folks out in Alberta. What makes those weirdos tick? I think people want to preserve their jobs here. I think people want to have the best economy possible here. I believe people want to be respected in Canada. Thank you, Toronto columnist. And I think they want, and they aren't. They aren't. I have received more hate mail in the last 3 months. And to the people who identify where they're from, 95% of it is from one province. And 95% of it says exactly what the columnist that you quoted earlier in this show said, which is leave, get out of here. Canada would be better off without you. You're all a bunch of self-entitled whiners who have it too good. And all I say is, because I am a Canadian and I am a patriotic Canadian. My old man was in the army for 27 years. I am a Canadian. Be careful what you wish for. Don't wish for that. Take the other road that I think Albertans really want, which is the road where we get some of what we want. We get as I said, our oil and gas industry unleashed, a modicum of respect for the place that Alberta does have in Confederation. I mean, that's what people want. So it's not, nobody's running around here saying, let's separate from Canada tomorrow.
So, Rick, there's
getting
what you deserve, and when it comes to Alberta, and then there's threatening separation. A sentiment you're going to hear inevitably from places in Ontario is the Premier of Alberta now has a trump card that she seems to be willing to play, whether it's threatening to leave, signaling that the province could possibly leave. In a relationship, hanging that over your spouse's head, this idea that I'm going to leave unless you do X. Some people would call that blackmail. So how do we get Albertans' needs seriously addressed meet those desires fairly, without, constantly having this idea of Alberta separating, hanging over our heads, and politicians using that to their advantage, with increasing exaggeration.
Well, good word. I love that word, exaggeration. I have never heard Premier Smith say privately to me or publicly that she supports leaving Canada. In fact, yesterday at the press conference, she made very clear that she believes in a united Canada. So I don't know where this idea is. I think what is happening is we are wanting to get the attention of people such as the people in Ontario to allow what is a mutual benefit to Alberta, benefit to the rest of Canada. So I don't hear, if in Quebec there are probably nationalists or separatists who are just that way, period, full stop. It doesn't matter what happens in Quebec. Here, this is very much demand driven. We just want to get the Canadian government to acknowledge that this money-making province can be allowed to operate within Canada to make more money for everybody. And I think that's what puzzles people. So if people are saying, well, no, it's throwing over your head. No, it's frustration. It's anger. It's you're not listening. It's, you talk about in a relationship. And if somebody says, you know what, let's take that. That's a beautiful analogy. And somebody in the relationship says, you know what, we're pretty hurt. We've been hurt for a long time. That's what our feeling is. And we get well, just sucking up, Buttercup. Here's a pat on the head, Buttercup. There's not a problem. What does that do to the relationship? Mm-hmm. What does that do? Maybe people in the rest of Canada should look at themselves and say, how would they feel? Even that Toronto columnist, how would he feel if when somebody comes and says, we are Canadians, we want to be part of Canada, we want to contribute more to Canada, and they are not heard? What do you expect us to do? And what we seem to be hearing is, shut up. Shut up. There isn't a problem here. Somebody's putting ideas in your mind. This relationship's beautiful. We love each other. What's the problem? Would that work in a relationship? No, it wouldn't work in a relationship. Is the relationship fixable? Of course. We're Canadians. But this idea that the status quo that you mentioned at the beginning is acceptable, no, you can't beat us up anymore. I'm sorry. If that's the price to be a Canadian, that you get to be demonized, you get to be beaten up by the government that represents the country, that is too high a price to pay for some people. This isn't ideological for most people. It's not philosophical for most people. This is a question of just fair treatment for Alberta. What is the problem on Bloor Street? Can't they see that? Can't they see that in red, in the red Liberal ridings? Because, by the way, I get emails from people in Ontario who are not in that group who agree with me. So there are many, many, many people in Ontario who agree with exactly what I've been saying this morning. And they send me emails and say, keep it up, because we understand that everybody contributes to this country and Alberta is a big contributor. That's the emails I also get, on top of the emails saying that I'm a Vichy collaborator and should be indicted for treason and have my passport taken away at the very least.
Rick, I will never advocate for your passport to be taken away. I'll never tell you to shut up. Ladies and gentlemen, that is Rick Bell. He is a columnist with Postmedia. You can find him in the Calgary Herald, the Calgary Sun, sometimes the National Post. We're so glad he could join us today. And I look forward, Rick, to us singing Maple Leaf Forever again over the phone, bridging that gap between Toronto and Calgary. All the best.
Thank you. All the best to all my lovely friends in Ontario.